You have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Do we have any comments on the minutes from August 30th, 2022? It was a robust meeting. When I went over the meeting minutes, that'll get you prepared for today because we're kind of continuing it for today. Okay, I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes from August 30th, 2022.
So moved.
Can I get a second? All right.
I'll second it. This is Jeanette.
Thank you, Jeanette. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Motion carries. Lori, did we have any public comment?
We did not have any submitted public comment, and I don't believe anyone filled out a form. Oh, okay, no. Or I guess we do those ahead of time. No comment.
Thank you. NJ, I'll turn it over to you for outreach efforts.
Thank you. All right, so a couple of key points for our outreach over the project, specifically since we last put out the vision statement in draft form so that the public could comment on it. First thing that you'll see on the agenda is the Adventure Festival. We had that staff from 10 to 4 o'clock. Thank you to Kim, for the volunteer, Jennifer and Jeanette for helping me out with that. And we actually engaged 64 people at the Adventure Festival. So with all of the cool things we did, enough people spent some time talking to the city about the 50-year vision, which was pretty cool. Of the 64, 10 to 15 said that we were on track. And then we got a lot of comments on, we're pretty good, but they have 1 or 2 revisions. The common themes that we heard are more offering of good restaurants, a swimming pool, revitalize the downtown area, more transportation to neighboring cities, and preserve river and natural recreation access. All of the things that we've been hearing throughout the process, but just good to get out there and confirm that we're being consistent with what we're gathering. The second bullet point that we have is we did a community conversation with True Love Ministries, which is a Spanish congregation. And Jeanette, are you on the line to talk a little bit about that?
So NJ and I were invited by the congregation to go.
Jeanette, I think you're on mute.
No. Let me try. Now you can?
Yep.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So NJ and I went to the congregation, and it was a great crowd. We did get a lot of participants to, after the service, to go into a room and give us their feedback. NJ did collect. Some people chose to write down their feedback, and NJ did collect those documents. I myself spoke to a few of the members there, and just to ask them questions on what they would prefer. And see, these are some of the input that they provided. Many said that they want a Costco or a Winco in the area, so large food grocery stores. A lot of them said that they would like more clothing stores and quality clothing options here. And they wanted to see more activities for kids in various ages and recreational theme parks. They did mention the skate park in Scappoose, but it's really small. They also said that they would want more Latino resources, community resources to start a business and learn how to buy land. They also mentioned the need for hospitals. And I think a big one was need of transportation, because they want a better way to get to Portland or on the west side or around Columbia County. And a lot of them were actually, they do come from a distance, as far as Canby, I believe, and Gresham. But we had a lot of them also live in St. Helens and neighboring cities. Did I miss anything, NJ?
don't think so. I think you got it all.
Okay.
Finishing out our outreach efforts with the survey, so far we have 263 survey responses, which, just to give context, well, now thanks to Pat, who told me he completed it a couple hours ago, we have 264. Comparing it to the last survey, which asked more of the general questions, what do you like about Scappoose? What do you want to see improve? That was 178 people that responded to that survey. So a lot more people interested in the vision work, and we're getting a lot more feedback on that. We made the survey available in English and Spanish to expand the amount of people that can participate in our visioning work. And the survey is going to close this coming Friday at 5 o'clock. So if you haven't taken it yet, please do. I can give you the link, but a lot of people have taken it so far. And then once the vision statement closes, Anais from 3J Consulting is going to take a look at all of the outreach activities that we've done as a committee and as a project team and put it all together to make the final vision statement, which is going to guide a lot of the future elements of the 50-year plan.
And Jay, is that coming back to us first before the final, or is it that will just be a final coming back to us?
Lori, do you know that?
I believe she'll come back with an updated draft form. That would be my guess. Because yeah, you would probably want to look at it again before we say it's final. This would not get adopted or put in anything until the adoption process in 2024. So I think there's an opportunity to vet it again by this committee.
We don't need to belabor it, but just coming back to us as a draft would be
Yes.
great. We could say any final touches to it and then make it
Like,
final.
yep.
Perfect. Okay. Is CJ next here?
What?
I think you are.
Okay.
Over to you, CJ.
All right. Hello again. CJ Doxey with my G Planning. I think I'm getting a little feedback there. Oh, yeah. Maybe it's coming through here. Okay. Testing, 1, 2, 3. I think I'm good. All right. So our agenda for today, is this the right one? So the agenda, we've already touched a bit on the outreach efforts from the larger project here. So we're going to start off, at least in my role, on the 2017 HNA code updates. And then to finish or wrap up on the housing strategies as the part 2 of our meeting from the last time we got together here. It's just going to be me tonight. Brandon Buckley, my colleague and team member, is under the weather, so I'm going to do my best to cover his parts. I feel really confident about talking and having answering questions on a lot of the incentives or housing strategies. But anything that I'm not able to answer, I will get the answers and follow it up electronically, since this will be the last meeting that we have officially. So just to recap, we are reaching the end of the housing needs analysis, the HNA project. We're discussing the housing strategies here. As far as the first meeting there, we discussed a lot of land supply strategies and development code strategies. And I think we'll have an opportunity to revisit those if there's a need or an interest in discussing some of those. I imagine some people may have had an opportunity to really think and consider and mull over some of the strategies there, and certainly happy to continue that conversation as needed. But I think one of the biggest kind of outcomes of the last meeting was a large question as to what were some of the implementation measures that happened or occurred as part of the most recent HNA update back in 2017. And as a response to that, what we did was we put together just a quick kind of cover memo, our housing strategies work that goes through and summarizes the updates that were connected with the 2017 HNA and summarizes it by the individual zones. So I'll spend the next couple slides just kind of recapping that information in there. The memo does go into a little bit more detail, and I don't know that I created a slide for it, but I'll also touch on some of the the overlap between 2017 and now in terms of what was done then and what we're looking at refining as part of this planning effort. So the slide here shows all the zones or the chapters of the current code that were modified as part of that planning effort. As you'll see, touches on all your residential zones, created a new cottage housing development regulations. It touched on your commercial zones and the planned development overlay and accessory dwelling units, which comparatively are pretty minor. So on this next slide here, this one more or less summarizes the uses that were authorized as part of that previous effort. So anything in the table here that has either permitted or subject to standards or in case conditional use, these are uses that weren't previously permitted in these zones prior to the 17, but as of the 2017 H&A are now permitted. So you may recall from the last meeting that we identified a housing strategy as making sure that the variety and the types of housing is expanded and commented that the city is already doing that to a large extent. You're basically covering your bases as far as middle housing goes. So you could see things like your duplex, triplex, quadplex townhouses are permitted in your zones. You've added townhouse, multifamily work live type units and your high density residential zones and your commercial zones. You've added cottage housing to all your residential zones. You've added ADUs to your lowest residential density zones. Manufactured parks to your middle housing, excuse me, your medium density housing zones. So you've authorized lots of new uses across the board there.
I would just update, duplex was added to the R1 zone.
Duplex. Oh, yes.
It's in this, just,
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
sure.
Yes.
Ask a quick question, just for clarification on the live, work, townhouse, or multifamily. Would that, like, just the phrase multifamily, that just solo apartments? Is that mixed use, commercial on the bottom, residential up top? What's included in that?
You do authorize mixed use in those zones already, but this one specifically is for units on your ground floor that can be either commercial or living space. They have like a residential component to it, but almost like miniaturized mixed use in a single unit almost.
It doesn't necessarily require a commercial use. It could be exclusively residential.
No.
Oh, it
No,
does have
there
to
does
have.
have to have a commercial.
Yeah.
unit. Okay.
Just saying that live work is considered commercial.
It's allowed in the commercial, expanded commercial and the high density residential zones.
It's allowed instead of.
So it's an additional use that was added to those zones in 2017, where it didn't exist before that. The definition for that type of housing slash, live work unit. So whatever the use was, say on the ground floor, would still need to meet whatever the allowed uses are for that commercial or expanded commercial zone. So whatever that, like if it's an office or if it's, a hairdresser or what have you, it would still need to be a use that's allowed in that zone. Is that what you were asking?
I was just asking if live work replace if someone did live work on the ground floor, does that replace the commercial requirement?
It's defined in our code.
Defined
and
as
I
commercial or
believe-
residential.
Yeah, I believe it's defined as you have to have either all of or the majority of the ground floor as your commercial space.
So I rent from Brian, so I could technically live in that space also.
That is a question for the building owner. It would be permitted by zone, but
Oh.
it's not set up to do that currently.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always thought of work live as kind of a townhouse setup.
Correct.
With commercial on the first floor and then one or two more floors above that are residential.
Mhm.
The idea is often it'll have individual ownership. Instead of it being an apartment, it'll often be done like a row house.
Yes.
And then the owner is also the business owner who also lives above.
Correct.
It's not very common. You see some of it in Northwest Portland. I used to live near some of that. And it seemed the main advantage of it was for people that had children and they had a business and they wanted to be able to keep the kids nearby. That was the only thing I ever saw that made it, that really seemed like it was a neat little
Yeah.
niche.
And I'll say we really haven't had interest or questions about
Don't
that
know.
type of
I-
housing
And
model.
I don't want to talk about it too much, but I was just in Portland. So in Portland, you can do live work side by side. You have a residential on one side and
Oh,
it's connected to the commercial.
Yeah, ours
the
is
other side.
actually in the definition of live work units. It does describe it. It's more, it's a vertical situation.
Commercial on the ground floor
Yeah.
and residential. above.
On Highway 30, Longfellow
Mhm.
and that block, is there apartments above?
There are, in some of those older buildings, there are apartments above.
That would fall under this?
Not the same way. In other words, these would be discrete individual units owned by one person where they have access from within their ground floor commercial to their residential above. So a little bit, a little bit different than these situations.
There are a couple live work units in my neighborhood of St. John's where the front half, they're all ground floor. The front half is like hair salon and the back half is the residential aspect of it. And the residential aspect, you have to walk through the business to get to it. It doesn't have dedicated residential access through a common corridor like you would maybe in your example. I'm thinking like the residential on top has its own residential access and it's separated from the business side.
Correct. And I think the thought in adding this at the time was that that might be a good solution for small scale entrepreneurs who want to own something down in the downtown overlay area where you still get that component of commercial where we want it to be walkable and people to come in and out of the little shops, but yet still someone could own that and live there as well. So it's like a small scale mixed use, like CJ said.
I think it's great. In the back.
Marissa.
For the Candlelight Apartments, can you please clarify what the zoning was for that development?
Yeah, that's expanded commercial zone.
Got it. Thank you.
So this is for Lori. It's being called 2017 HNA implementation. I believe it was shown to City Council December 2017 and wasn't implemented till January 2018 on a vote of, I think, 4-0 on January 6th. When was it actually then implemented after the yes vote on that time period?
There's a 30-day period in which before the ordinance becomes effective.
Okay, so in reality, this is a February 2018 changes.
That's when they became effective.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
Moving on. So this next table here gets at a couple other topic areas. Probably the two most common themes among the implementation associated with the last HNA is reduction in lot sizes and the establishment of new lot sizes for particular uses. So in the R1, I think that should also be R1, R4, and MH. You reduced your minimum lot size requirements for single family housing in those zones from in the R1, it went from 7,500 square feet down to 6,000. In the R4 and MH, it went from 6,000 down to 5,000. So you did those, and then because you authorized middle housing in a number of residential areas. You also established new lot sizes as part of that exercise. And then in terms of other standards, you, for the A1 and the commercial, expanded commercial, you established, city established live work standards, standards for the live work units in terms of the size and the split. The city did the buffer standards, which is one of the topics where we were recommending refining. And you added architectural standards and modified the development standards related to setbacks and that sort of thing. So all pretty typical for those types of implementation measures. And they're mostly connected to the types of uses that you're doing there.
Oh, now he has. One.
Yeah, I kind of got the sense. Is there a question online?
Oops,
Len, we can't hear you. Just a second. We're gonna unmute.
that's my fault. All right, Len, go ahead and unmute.
All right, it's unmuting supposedly.
We can hear you.
Okay, the live work standards. One of the things would have to think about is what about handicapped? Because if you have a handicapped person, say somebody that's lost a leg or whatever it is, trying to use a set of stairs to go to their residence would be very difficult. I think you should go back and look at that and have some side-by-side considerations. That would be more functional.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder to the folks online, please use the raise hand function if you wish to speak. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right, again, this is for Lori. In 2018, well, first of all, in listening to the last meeting, there's a concern, of course, you guys discussed it, about the lack of commercial space in Scappoose. In 2018, did you guys raise the concern that you were allowing the other standards in the commercial space? Did you kind of think about what would happen to commercial space down the road?
It was a discussion, and there was an assumption of what percentage would develop for commercial uses versus what percentage would develop for residential uses. And so that was planned into those assumptions for needed units and land supply.
Really, it came down to the developer to decide, correct? I mean, we just assume, but it's.
That's correct. Yeah, we based it on what we had seen for previous development. So we started with an assumption for sure. And then, of course, yeah, the market decided because it was outright permitted. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and then a couple other things as far as the 2017 H&A implementation is the city established cottage housing, cottage clusters as a new use in several zones, and along came with it a new chapter in the development code that provided development standards that regulated the list of items here, including the density, the types or arrangement of uses, coverage and floor area, open space requirements, parking, architectural details. So a lot of that information was new and developed as part of the implementation effort as part of that. And then the planned development overlay is pretty standard or pretty minor overall. It just was modified to allow R1s to be eligible for using the planned development overlay as a conditional use. And as far as your accessory dwelling units, the modification there was to change the parking requirement from 4 spaces down to 3 spaces. So pretty minor items there. In terms of everything that was done in 2017 and how that is overlapping with the work that we're doing or recommendations that we're doing as part of this, only a few of these items are recommended for refinements. One of those being the lot sizes for a lot of your middle housing. So your townhouse, triplex, quadplex, all have an established minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, and then a 2,000 foot minimum requirement for units 3 and 4. The recommendation that we made as part of this is to reduce that increment from 2,000 down to 1,500. The idea being that it would make it a little easier from a lot consolidation standpoint to get the minimum lot size you needed from getting 2 lots instead of 3.
Is there a
Another one-
document that has this? I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
That has the changes that you're talking about right now?
Yeah, it's page 6.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's next time we'll start numbering the whole packet so we can easily refer to it, but it's on page 6 of CJ's report.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's at the end. The other one is the special buffer standards that are applicable to multifamily buildings and live work multifamily buildings. The recommendation or the refinement from that previous effort is to either remove that special buffer requirement or modify it so that it scales to the size, or excuse me, the height of the development. That's to make it a little more responsive to the scale and make it more viable or a little bit easier to build middle housing types in a way that can be compatible with adjacent uses. Another one that we're recommending as a refinement is the reduction to the on-site parking requirement that's applicable to ADUs. 2017, it went from 4 down to 3. Our recommendation is to drop it further still as a way to make those things viable. And then finally, with the cottage housing, the new cottage housing regulations were adopted then. And as we were reviewing the development code for opportunities to incentivize middle housing, we looked at it through the lens of the cottage cluster model code, which is developed for medium-sized cities. So it's not a requirement for the city, but we felt like it's an opportunity to improve that. Even though, again, it's not required, it's something that the city could do to make that a little bit more viable because the model code that we use to kind of review the existing standards was developed collaboratively with developers who specialize in that type of.
You define medium-sized city, just so I have an understanding of population.
Yeah, so HB 2001, so the cottage, excuse me, I said medium housing cities, but it's for large cities. So the code requirements for cottage cluster housings really kick in and become mandatory once the city reaches 25,000.
Oh, so we won't actually reach that in
won't,
50 years?
Not for a while.
Oh, okay.
But again, the idea is that the cottage cluster is a housing type that seen as an affordable housing type, mostly because you can get greater number of smaller units in an arrangement that's compatible with surrounding neighborhoods, and smaller units typically equate to a more affordable living arrangement.
Affordability, not livability.
I would like to think that cottage cluster housings have a high degree of livability to them, just because one of the fundamental characteristics of a cottage cluster housing is that they're individual units that are organized around a common.
I don't think I'm necessarily speaking to cottage housing. I'm just speaking to like the plan in general of reducing lot sizes so we can cram more people in. Just seems getting more and more congested.
Right. And I think that a lot of these measures are aimed at improving the affordability in ways that is respectful to the typical livability characteristics. A lot of these,
Cute.
yeah, a lot of these middle housing types are compatible from a scale and density with typical single family type neighborhoods. So it allows you to utilize a lot of your existing infrastructure without having to build out new infrastructure and accommodate growth in the city, being sensitive to surrounding neighborhoods.
I have a comment.
Yeah, why don't we do Kim first? Kim and then Brian and then Paul.
Just a question about kind of the sizes of the cottage homes. Are they generally large enough to accommodate a small family? Are they like 2, 3 bedroom, like 3 bedroom?
Yeah. They have a size limitation to them. I want to say that they're limited to 1,200 square feet, which
Yeah.
is a good size. You can do a 2,
The
3
young
bedroom.
family.
Yeah, that.
New Yorkers do it less. New
There's
Yorkers do it in
Pictures of cottage housing on 32 and 33, the packet. Brian?
Yeah, there's something we keep talking about that I think we need a little clarification on. First of all, I have no issue with cottage housing, so that's not an issue for me. I'm fine with it. But we keep on talking about affordability. Scappoose is about a small cog in the greater Portland metro area. Us trying to cram stuff in is not going to make housing more affordable here because we are part of this large metropolitan area. Scappoose is not a little farm town that's 100 miles from Portland. So what I'm saying, bringing this up is, I think we should really try to make a plan that makes the city that we want, not trying to constantly tackle affordable housing because it's not going to be affordable. When we think of affordable for a 2-bedroom apartment out here, we're thinking people that live here are thinking $1,400 bucks. But that's not the standard. Standard is actually much higher than that. So when we create a 2-bedroom affordable housing unit in Scappoose, it's really affordable housing for Portland and Hillsborough. And because we're part of this large market, we build something here. Normally, in a normal closed system, if you increase supply, you lower price. The problem is that we're such a small part of the total supply picture for metropolitan Portland that if we try to start cramming stuff in here to push down costs, it's not necessarily going to do it. It's good because what's going to happen is we're just such a small component of the total available housing in metropolitan Portland that it's almost irrelevant. So when we talk about affordable housing, I mean, I think it's fine not to try to put, we're going to go a little denser, we're going to do this, but let's not try to fixate on that because we can't do it. It's impossible. There's no way we're going to get housing costs down here. Short of changing of Oregon's land use laws and allowing massive UGB expansion. Because it's just simple. I mean, people are renting here as they would rent in Hillsborough or Portland. And I mean, the price point, like if you look at the new apartments that are going in, they're 1,300 and change, I think 1,286 or something like that for a 320 square foot apartment. That's the size literally of a hotel room. And that is considered affordable because compared to our income for this area, you could afford that based on our income of what, 70,000? As a percentage of that, you'd still be able to afford it. It's still not what we consider affordable though, as locals, not in terms of that. So I really think it's fine to work towards trying to make housing, reasonable, but we're never going to be able to keep costs down here because we're part of Portland Metropolitan. And as long as we have these current land use laws that prevent us from expanding our UGB to the extent that we would like to, I just don't see how it's like putting your finger in the dike. It's not going to work. So let's make a great city for us to live in. And
livability.
Let's get as much land as we can for the UGB. And I think a lot of this other stuff, sure, we have to tweak it. I know the state has requirements, but getting lost in the weeds on it is just not going to do us any good. It's not going to create affordable housing for our kids. It just isn't. Thanks.
So I'll go on to just to clarify something. So affordable housing is defined as 30% of someone's income.
It's typical. That's a typical way of
So is that how we're defining it with this with these documents?
Yeah, so
3% or-
I think it's easy to say housing, affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, that is typically defined as a percentage. So yes, you use that 30% income ratio, but then you also view it within the area's median income. So for a typical family, you view it as 80% AMI or 120% AMI. What is the family's income paired to that AMI? And that's used as a way to define affordability levels.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, is it our household income here somewhere in the 70,000 range?
Household income, according to what I was seeing recently, is what it was like 80,000 in 2019
Okay.
and up to 85,000.
Wow, okay, so if you take, just for clarification, so if you take the 85,000, and then you multiply that by 30%, you'd end up with a very high number
But that's for a household. That's not for,
for an individual.
yeah.
And that's also what, so everyone's affordability is different, right?
Correct.
Right.
So if you make $100,000 a year, $30,000 to spend, affordable to you is $30,000 a year to spend on housing.
Yeah.
If it's 50,000, it's $15,000 a year to spend on housing. So affordability is different for everyone.
Right. But I thought that when we're talking about affordable housing, you go off the household or the individual income for the area. The average is how usually you calculate that.
At the
So-
area median income.
Right. So if you're going off a median income that is substantially high, that creates the definition. So it's kind of a little, how can I put this? It's not deceptive, but it's what you all might think is affordable for like your kid getting out of high school and being able to get an apartment is actually not the numbers that any of this is geared towards. So, okay, thank you.
Paul?
Fine, you said exactly what I was going to say. Amazing. So I have a real estate agent friend, and I did analysis of the average house pricing in Scappoose versus Portland area, and the graph is unbelievable. And him saying that it's a drop in the bucket. We follow the rest of the area, minus a few percent in some parts of Portland, but in some parts of Portland and Washington County, it's almost exactly the same average price of a house for the last 4 years. So as Brian's saying, doesn't matter what we do because we are a drop in the bucket, especially we know that 80% of the people aren't working here, they're going elsewhere. So I agree with Brian, what he said is that we need to look at these things and make the Scappoose that we want. Thank you.
Pat, did you have something?
Yes. We had
Can you speak into the microphone, please, Pat?
When we had the first questionnaire, I found a number of seniors saying, we don't have senior housing.
Mhm.
These cottages work out really well for widows, single people. The seniors can go out there in their center and they can do their thing, or they can sit on their front porch in the summer and talk back and forth. These cottage developments tend to be really popular with seniors, and we have a lack of senior housing. And many of the seniors in the senior housing have families close for support.
I don't think anybody's against the cottage housing structure. It's more so just condensing, reducing lot sizes. I mean, if we have a cottage neighborhood, that's fantastic. I mean, people need that. It's just allowing more and more people into our city. We don't have, I mean, we have Highway 30, which is already incredibly congested. We just don't have a town that can accommodate a lot of people. So why are we trying to accommodate a lot of people?
CJ?
Yeah, I think
I'm sorry, NJ.
I mean, NJ?
Unless you want to comment on that, CJ.
Leonard, go ahead.
Okay. Am I back to muted?
We can hear you.
Nope, you're good. Oh, now you muted. We cannot hear you at the moment.
And,
There we go.
Perfect. Don't do anything.
okay, am I talking now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. In conjunction with what Brian was saying about the cost and the 30%, if you look at the new apartments that we talked about, the 1,250 foot, $350 deal, basically it requires somebody to have an income of about $4,600 a month, okay, for a studio. And you start profiling what that means. Are we going to draw a bunch of Intel kids to live individually in Scappoose? Probably not. The saddest thing about it is that we obviously we're caught in our own conundrum, in the sense that land is too high, fees are too high, processes are too high, and so there, we get this conversation about affordability is really sort of in the nebulae. The reality of it is, we have an ever increasing housing cost. We have an ever increasing cost of operation. We have an ever increasing cost of development and function. And we're not going to go away from that. If anybody's got it, unless we have a Great Depression, but other than that, hopefully that doesn't ever occur. But we're stuck in this ever increasing set of dollars. I agree. We don't need to be a major city. We're comfortable. We're here.
Is there anyone else online? Jennifer, did you have something?
A couple of things. I just wanted you to know that the HUD numbers, there's no HUD numbers for Columbia County. We're all grouped into the metropolitan statistical area. So those numbers that you see from HUD are actually higher than what they would be here. I think the Portland state numbers are more accurate. In fact, in St. Helens, I think it's about the area median income, the difference between the two is about $25,000 a year. The other thing, had a question about in St. Helens, the average residential lot size is about 58 by 100 square feet. So and we put a duplex on one of those lots, which fit quite nicely. So I guess I'm wondering why the minimum would be 7,000 square feet. Is that normal for a city of this size?
So the minimum for duplex, just so I understand you, the minimum for duplex here in Scappoose is 7,000 square feet for a duplex?
Yeah, in the R1, it's 10,000 square feet, and then it drops to 7,000 square feet in R4 and MH.
Yeah. So those are the lot size requirements that were agreed upon as part of 2017, as part of the 2017 effort. We're not recommending any changes to those minimum lot size requirements. I think there are several places where they are lower than that and they appear to be working fine, but it becomes a preference between jurisdictions over what they think is going to be the best fit for types or the scale and density of housing that they want. So the preference really.
The only reason I bring it up is because I think that you reduce the requirement for additional units, that you're encouraging a lot of fourplexes.
Yes.
And if the minimum size for 2 units, then you'd end up more with 2 attached units, which might fit in better with older residential neighborhoods.
Yeah, and so both options would be allowed. And I don't know if there's an appetite to reduce that additional unit from 2,000 square feet to 1,500 for minimum lot size, but that's their recommendation. And like I said, we already reduced so many lot sizes so recently that, and I had told CJ early on, I really don't see that there would be an appetite to go any lower. And so that was just one of the specific things that they saw that we could refine if that was the recommendation by this committee, to council, and I don't know if council has an appetite for reducing lot sizes either. So all these things are up for discussion. You know, these are recommendations. These are not things we have to do. These are recommendations.
Yeah, and these are recommendations that we are proposing for the city based off of our experience working with their cities. Um, the recommendations are exactly that. This advisory body is here to um, pass these recommendations along to Planning Commission and City Council. So this is the opportunity where we can take your feedback and make adjustments to these as needed. If something is just going to fall flat, then that's good for us to know. So make those adjustments as needed.
One small clarification, if I could. When I say we should make the city we want, what I mean is that we can always reduce lot sizes at any future date for any reason. The city can do that. They're allowed. The hardest thing is getting more land. When we start increasing density, we reduce our ability to get more land because we don't have a need for that land because now we've shown that we have enough room for our growth without getting the land. So, and there may be a point in our future, 10, 20 years from now, where we need to go a much denser thing. But really what we want to do is get our UGB bigger so that we can grow in more of a traditional Scappoose way instead of starting to do 320 square foot apartments. And then in the future, once we've got our UGB expanded, because the state will never tell us no to increasing our density, but they will tell us no to increasing our UGB. Then in the future, if needed, we can always increase density. And there are some small density things like adjusting the fourplex lot down. It makes sense to be able to do it on a 10,000 square foot lot because there simply aren't 12,000 square foot lots that are real common. So then you're looking for 3 lots, which you're not going to probably find. But so there's some fine tuning there. But just keep in mind that when we start increasing density, we reduce our UGB expansion, which then kind of is pushing us towards smaller and smaller homes on smaller and smaller lots. And there's specialized things like senior housing, and cottages are great because usually they're single floor, and seniors want single floor housing.
And they don't want to keep up a big house.
Right, and they don't want a big house, and they would prefer to have an HOA that maybe even takes care of the landscaping for them. And that's all great, but the way for us to go, I mean, just the way I see it is we don't want to box ourselves in by creating too much density when we can always increase density. What we can't always increase is our UGB. So, okay, thank you.
So, yeah, and I'll just be clear, the recommendations that are associated with this, I mean, with the exception of the incremental change there, we're not recommending any changes to lot size requirements. That was done. Lori communicated to us that the appetite for that seems pretty low. And so with that in mind, we looked at other opportunities for promoting middle housing types. And if there's a way to promote a middle housing type through a development code or through some other sort of incentive, that's in our view a way of accommodating that growth while also being respectful of the city's small size, small character.
Also, if I could, there was a question last time about the recommended mix between single family detached versus other types of housing. And the question was, are we changing that recommended percentage split? Because based on the previous HNA, we weren't sure if manufactured houses were included in the count for single family detached. So I think you might have raised that question. Yeah. So I did go back and look. And so in the current HNA draft, there's a recommendation for 64% of new housing to be single family detached, which included manufactured homes. So on page 57 of the previous housing needs analysis, which you don't have here, it's the 2017. But I was able to pull it up. it says 65% of new housing will be single-family detached, a category which includes manufactured housing. So it's a change of 1%.
Oh,
So it's
not all.
roughly very similar.
Okay,
Yeah, I just want to confirm that.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Good discussion. Like it.
Right.
All right. Moving on. If there isn't any more discussion on 2017 H&A implementation, this is you may recall the table of the land supply and policy and code strategies that we recommended and had an opportunity to discuss as part of the last meeting there. This table lists them out and our kind of initial assessment of what the priority for those would be, either near term or long term. Just want to take an opportunity to see if there are any questions, if anybody had any thoughts or follow up from our discussion on these last time. And really mainly looking at, in this respect, if simplest of terms, if the near term or long term priority is appropriate for the city, and to use as kind of a, not something that the city necessarily has to adhere to, but just as a way to help prioritize what strategies that they should look at pursuing moving forward.
So just to put this in perspective for tonight, last meeting we went through 1 through 7.
Yes.
And so he's asking for feedback on 1 through 7 after we went through it. We've thought about it. Feedback on 1 through 7, and then tonight we're going to talk about 8 through
Yeah. So
whatever the
if there's
18.
any discussion on these, I'll go through. Oops.
So let's just open it up. Are there any questions on the 1 through 7? Any priorities there? Anyone online with any questions on that?
That's what we talked about last time.
We already hashed it out. It's in the meeting minutes. But is there any other questions on that? Okay. If you want to get into the 8 strategy incentive, that'd be great. Start there.
So yeah, these are strategies that include incentives and funding sources or programs. And all of these, except for subsidized affordable housing, all have a long-term priority for them. And as a reminder, when we say long-term priority, it's something that isn't either critical for addressing housing needs, or there is a limitation to it from capacity standpoint, a resource capacity standpoint, either from a funding perspective or a staffing. So a number of these are really there as a toolbox of sort in the case where funding or staffing does become available, or needs in the next 20 years change more than what we have anticipated. And an example of that would be, there's a huge growth spurt or some sort of development that has a lot of housing needs associated with it. These can be viewed as strategies that you can use to help address some unanticipated housing needs. So starting with strategy 8, system development charge waivers or deferrals. Pretty straightforward in terms of the housing strategy. The city already has system development charges applicable for residential developments. This strategy would be to either waive those for specific housing types, affordable housing, for example, or mixed use housing, as a way to encourage those and make them more financially feasible. The waiver would be a reduction in the overall fee. A deferral would be a strategy whereby the applicant would pay it at, for example, certificate of occupancy, or you can set up a payment program where you are not out those fees necessarily. You're not out those fees. It's just the timing at which the city receives them is deferred. In a lot of instances, that could help a developer pencil out from a potential development project.
CJ and Lori, what type of feedback do you want us to give you on these? They're long-term objectives which aren't critical. So what type of feedback from us do you want on this?
I mean, any comments you have, we'll accept. I mean, I know internally that city council looked at these options, in the interim between the last HNA and now, and we're not really on board with any of them, just given that we do need the funds to support our infrastructure, et cetera. So, or there were staffing limitations to running some of these larger programs, and some of them, especially when we get into the funding sources and programs, are just more applicable for larger cities that might have a whole housing unit within it. And so, but it's important, I think, regardless, for us to see what tools, even if they're not applicable here, that might be used, maybe in the future, maybe in the far future.
And I think from a feedback perspective, if this committee felt strongly about any one of these strategies as a potential solution for addressing housing needs and wanted to provide the feedback saying like, we want this to be a higher priority, then that could be an impetus or a goal that be worked towards, something that you can take time to develop and plan or program that capacity or identify and chase that funding as needed.
Question. The deferred, you talk about, I've never heard about it before, so I'm just kind of curious. So when you do deferred deferral on system development charges, are we talking about till they get their occupancy permit? Or are we talking about in effect the city becoming like a loaner and it's a long-term payment?
Yeah, that's a
Both.
good question. It can be both.
Either
So
or?
one approach is to tie it to the certificate of occupancy. So a lot of that, the payment gets deferred by a small amount.
Right.
But then you can also set up a payment plan or a payment program, in which case the city would want to coordinate with the finance department on how to administer that. And you could set it up for a payment plan over the course of a year or a couple of years, however you want to determine that.
What I've seen is it's in Portland, I think it's really short term, usually short term, even after C of O.
Permit or,
Even after C of O, it can be a year or two and it's like
Mm.
6% interest. So it's
so that it'd be an administrative issue for the city to manage something like that, I would assume.
Correct. And just the way our current code is written, we don't allow for any kind of deferral or non-payment of
Okay.
SDCs. It's just not, there's literally no appetite for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, okay, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I was just trying to understand it a little better.
Sure.
NJ.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was curious if we've interviewed developers and builders on whether SDCs are a barrier to doing work in Scappoose.
No, we haven't had an opportunity to talk with developers about this strategy in particular. This strategy is based off of best practices that we've seen done elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah, I understand the elected officials, there may not be appetite. It seems that it might be something worth considering if it were identified that barriers to development are an issue in the housing shortage. So
Mhm.
Jennifer.
I can say we're looking at building 10 units here in Scappoose. The SDCs are over $170,000 for that, which is a huge amount for us to raise. If we could defer it until we sold the units, that would make a huge difference.
Question. correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our SDCs and SCAPUS are average for metropolitan or even lower than average.
Lower than average.
Yeah, so we're starting off already with lower SDCs in other areas. So I can't see it as a hindrance that unless you want to say it's a hindrance everywhere.
The prices are more or less here too. So Jennifer, those 10 units you're talking about, is that a more capital A affordable housing? I mean, are those like low income housing units or are they market rate units?
Affordable homeownership for people families between 35 and 60% of the median income.
Okay, so that's more of the capital A
Capital A.
affordable. So that makes a difference too. So if we're talking about increasing the urban growth boundary, not providing density, one of the things we could talk about is incentives or getting more having incentives for capital A affordable housing here.
My sense of it is that the city has so much stuff they need, water treatment, sewer treatment. You know, we don't have sidewalks in town everywhere. We have people want a community center. They want all this stuff. And my whole life, when I've been buying and selling real estate since I was in my 20s, the towns that do well are towns people want to live in. And I think the idea, we've already got an enterprise zone and an urban renewal district, which is sapping tax dollars out of our coffers. And I think at this point, our best bet for a bright future for this town is to make it a place that people want to live and have enough land to build. But if we start trying to what often happens with any kind of incentives to build, it actually just increases the value of the land. So if the person already owns the land, it will be an incentive to build. But if they don't own the land, then when somebody looks at that site and tries to determine if that site is buildable, then if there's incentives to build, it just raises the value of the land. So it's just a transfer of wealth, basically. That's not the case if somebody already owns the land. If they already own the land, then the incentives would actually incentivize them to do that. But like I said, we already have an urban rural district and an enterprise zone, and we need a tax base. And people, I was at a meeting not too long ago, and somebody said, "Why don't we have a community center? Why don't we have this? Why don't we have that?" And well, the answer is it takes tax dollars, and you can't give it all away on all these different programs and expect to get those things because they don't come out of air. And if you take a look at water and sewer bills, I think they've doubled in the last 8 years or so. So it's not like the city's not increasing fees. And when we talk about affordable housing, one of the things is to keep services reasonably priced for the people that already live here. So anyhow.
So what Jennifer's talking about is capital A units that you're trying to build with those SDC fees that are market rate SDC fees, even though they're building capital A type units.
Mhm.
Yeah, if this were an area that you wanted to pursue further, you could target the waivers for certain types of housing. Example here being either affordable housing or wanted to do mixed use or middle housing or cottage cluster types, if those were seen as important enough to forego that SDC and in a trade-off respect, then you could be very strategic. Moving on to the next one, tax exemptions or abatements. This is a strategy where you offer a financial incentive again to developers to improve the long-term economic performance of a property, and it can be done by foregoing taxes on the property generally for 10 years, depending on the type of tax exemption that you can use. There's a variety of them that are authorized under ORS. Housing Strategy Court lists a number of them, including the nonprofit low-income housing, low-income rental housing tax credit, homeowner rehabilitation in cities tax credit, So what these all do is they offer a tax exemption or abatement for a uh, particular use, in most cases affordable housing, as a way to incentivize that and make sure that that housing type is viable. There are some trade-offs to consider, similar to the SDC exemptions. If you were to exempt them, is that you would be foregoing that revenue for a predetermined number of years, however long that exemption applies. A challenge with doing that is you also need to have agreement from at least more than 50% of the tax roll agreeing to that particular tax exemption. So often that's either the school district or the county that the city would want to get agreement with for whatever particular tax exemption or abatement, so that they can get that approved and move forward. Strategy.
And Jennifer?
I just want to make a comment about that. One in particular was the freeze on assessed value. We run into people that generally widows, and they aren't repairing their homes because they're worried about increasing the property value. And I feel like if you had something in place for those type of people, that you would increase the quality of your housing stock.
Right. So
That would be done at the county level, probably, yes, as far as since they assess the property taxes.
um,
I'm wondering.
yeah, I would need to get back to you on the details. I don't have an answer for that.
I could be wrong, but my understanding of the tax code is that they're going to get that roughly 3% increase a year. As long as they do an addition, maintenance and repairs will not impact their taxes.
Okay.
So it may be an educational issue.
Oh,
The only exception to that would be in a strong downward market, where if they may not get the reduction that they would want to get because they're capped on the upside. So in theory, if we had a really down market, then if they did work on their home, they could potentially not get as much of a reduction. But on the upside, it's capped at about 3% a year increase. And they pretty much take it every year, except for like back in like 2009.
Does that get reassessed when they pull a permit?
Well, so we're talking about maintenance like painting and roofs and things of that nature. Right? We're not talking about additions or things like that. If you do an addition or such, your taxes would go up.
Is that what they're talking about?
Some of these
Additions or
homes haven't
maintenance?
had any maintenance for 30 years. So
We're talking.
That would be an
Repair,
educational issue.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be an extraordinary situation.
All right, moving on. Land use permit fee reductions. This is a similar strategy as the SDC waivers. This would be a waiver or a reduction in the land use permit fees for specific housing types. Again, this could be affordable housing or multifamily or middle housing, depending on how you want to target the reduction there. And the idea is to help promote specific housing types, be housing types for whatever fee reduction that you do to. So this one is a strategy that's viable, or that can be considered compared to some of the other strategies. Its impact in terms of penciling out a development is probably smaller compared to an SDC reduction, which, as we just heard, is pretty exorbitant compared to a land use permit fee. The expedited development review process. This is a strategy whereby if you have a housing application that is an application for a desired housing type, affordable housing or middle housing or multifamily, then you have a shortened review period or some additional staffing to help support or see that process through the land use review. There is a as I'm sure many people are aware, there's a state mandatory requirement for how long you're allowed to do in a review period. You're allowed to do 180 days from once an application is deemed complete. When you are issuing a land use approval, there's a new state law that already says if it's an affordable housing type of development, you need to shorten that time frame to 100 days. But you can look at opportunities of reducing that further, or adding staffing to help oversee those type of projects. Again, this is a long-term strategy because we recognize that the funding and the staffing here aren't enough to pull that off yet. But if it's needed, that could be something that you could do to help support certain housing types or affordable housing. Moving on to funding sources and program strategies. This is the next kind of category of housing strategies, and the last that we'll have that I'll talk through with this committee here. Subsidized affordable housing is the one of the only strategy out of these kind of long-term strategies that we've identified as a short-term strategy, just because we had a finding that housing affordability is an issue in the city as it is across the state, really. And there is a need for subsidized affordable housing just because a lot of people are struggling to afford the housing, and we're seeing a lot of issues rising out of that. This is, even though it's a short-term strategy, it's something that isn't necessarily something that the city has a direct hand in. Often this is done through housing authorities who use tax credits or federal voucher programs, things like Section 8, to help address those sort of housing needs. And the housing strategy is short-term in respect from city's support for those types of developments, or for partnering or working with nonprofit developers or housing authorities to build the subsidized housing to address some of those housing needs. The city could do this through a variety of other strategies, particularly with grant funding or public-private partnerships, which I'll go into in other strategies here.
Joe?
Quick, have you ever looked at inclusionary zoning where maybe a portion of the apartment has the subsidized housing, but not the whole apartment, a couple on each floor maybe?
Yeah, inclusionary, we didn't include that as a strategy here, and that's something that can be done. Inclusionary zoning is mandatory in some respects. If you are over a certain number of units or a certain size, and you're required to do that. The strategy that we have that closely approximates that is affordable housing incentives through development code allowances. So it's more of an allowance than a requirement, whereby if a particular strategy example, if someone were to provide a certain number of affordable housing units, or an entire unit or an entire development of affordable housing, they'll get high bonus or a density bonus or some sort of bonus to incentivize that sort of.
So is that captured in any way in these 18 recommendations or no?
The inclusionary housing is not.
Is
Or
it possible?
the inclusionary zoning. It is something that we can include there, and I think it would be a good discussion if there's interest in that. We can include that information there, and really look into the advisory committee for feedback on whether that would be short-term strategy or a long-term strategy that should be looked at.
Well, and not necessarily that it's a strategy we need to consider now, but if we're kind of putting together the playbook.
Yeah.
So if things shift dramatically, just understanding what the options are in the future, I think that would be a good one to add.
Absolutely. So we can add inclusionary housing as a strategy for long-term strategies, so that the city, if needed, can do that.
I would say with incentives. So there's incentives for a developer to have inclusionary zoning, inclusionary housing, versus a mandate of inclusionary housing, which is in Portland right now with units of 20 units and over.
The distinction is that you either incentivize it or you mandate it. And we have the strategy of incentivizing it. And I believe that's a short-term strategy. You can mandate it, and the city of Portland does that.
And we can have that on here as you said, as part of the playbook, but that's hasn't been very good in the city of Portland. It's just halted housing, and until the housing gets up to a certain level where developers can afford it. So it's had the opposite effect.
Yeah, what I've seen in St. John's, the neighborhood I live in Portland, is the threshold for inclusionary zoning is 20 units, and people are building 19 unit structures, and they're building 2 buildings on the same lot because the requirement in that case is connected to the buildings and not the lot.
It seems like it might be a reasonable option for down the road. And I agree with Pat that mandating it would be a big mistake. I think that it should not be financial incentives, but maybe an increase in density as an incentive. And that would be a way that wouldn't rob the city's coffers, wouldn't punish developers and reduce housing stock, but would actually potentially increase housing stock. And especially if we maybe did something like that for senior housing. To put a special caveat, because one of the things we do have is a shortage of senior housing. And so if we're going to go with a higher density, we would like it not to become something that where we're pulling in, I don't know how to put this politely, but basically pulling in underclass from Portland Metro, but more taking care of our own. And the seniors in this area have an issue with finding housing that's affordable. That would be a way that we could potentially give seniors affordable housing, not import Portland problems into our community, and not cost the city's coffers any money, and not punish developers. So,
Not drive the affordability even further. That's what that does. It limits supply.
Len?
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yep.
Okay. One of the things I was looking at the other day was the state of Oregon's rent control program. And it refers to apartments 15 years or older. And there was a limitation of rent raises 7% plus the CPI, and that's a posted number on an annual basis. This has started in 2019. Does anybody in Scappoose administer the issue of that kind of rent raise? Because we've seen obviously the Dawns and multiple apartments, which are now at the market rate of $1,900 or $2,100. And were those numbers, did that number carry through from 2018, or did it all of a sudden appear in 2021 when the market went up? If there's a regulatory question, I have no idea how it's supposed to be managed, but there is an affordable number because the state has generated a regulation that says we're going to protect those older apartments.
There's sorry, I'm okay, there we go. No, there's no one at the city that does that type of rent regulation. Again, some of these programs, and I think actually your mention of that, Len, is kind of covered in the last strategy 18. Again, it's just the size of the city, right? So a lot of these programs are going to be perhaps more appropriate for larger cities that have housing staff that can address these issues. And so if there was any kind of a program like that, it likely would be, implemented and enforced and carried out by a nonprofit housing provider or something along those lines.
Len, I had to mute you because there was some feedback loop. Did you have anything else to follow up on?
Yeah, Lori, my question would be, would the local housing authority then take that responsibility?
Correct. And so I think in that case, it would be more of us promoting it, on behalf of someone else rather than the city implementing it. And then Jennifer, did you have any comment on that one? Okay, thank you.
Right. Moving on, another funding source strategy is tax increment financing district, often called an urban renewal district. The city currently has one in place that covers most of the commercial area and a large extent of the airport area. The tax increment financing district could be used to support affordable housing or certain housing types. I don't believe the current program that's in place right now is really set up to do so, and I think that's largely because it's mostly in the commercial.
I believe we actually do have an identified project to support affordable housing, but based on, and I don't have the exact numbers, but I think based on the amount allocated to that, that it might help offset some costs, not, huge amounts of money, but maybe it would help pay for their SDCs, or maybe it would help pay their frontage improvement costs or things like that that are a heavy lift. But certainly it wouldn't, pay for an entire building or anything.
Right. And then with the TIF district, there's a lot of leeway in terms of the type and scope of improvements or support that they can provide there, as long as it's identified and within the program.
And I will say, just as a caveat, that like most urban renewal districts, it's going to take a while for the money to really come in and build up. So that, that project might not be planned to come online, or those monies be available for, 15 years out, or something like that. So
Yeah, so that's a good point about TIF districts. Is what they essentially do is create a break point in the tax roll when the district is established, and any increases in the tax roll after that point, that money becomes revenue for the TIF district and the urban renewal agency, which is diverted from city funds. To Brian's point about you know the amount of money that the city is able to use from general purposes. TIF districts, you're allowed up to a certain amount of an area to be under a TIF district. Our rough estimates show that you could potentially expand or establish another one if there was a need or a desire or interest to do so. And if you were to do that, you could establish a different set of priorities and objectives for housing in particular, again, if there's an interest for that. All right, the next strategy is one that does require either partnerships or funding in order to accomplish, and that is land acquisition and banking. Both of these strategies are aimed at reducing the cost of housing by directly supporting or purchasing land. So in the land acquisition strategy there, what city would essentially do is buy up a piece of property or properties that they anticipate will grow or will be an area that will experience growth, and they'll sit on that and then use that as an opportunity to develop down the road or partner with a nonprofit or other housing organization to develop that and pass some of the costs or pass some of the savings along to the housing development to make it affordable, or a mixed use housing. Um, the challenge with that is you have to identify potential sites for it. In order to do that, there needs to be a little bit of market insight in terms of determining which places are going to be that are relatively affordable to purchase now that won't develop for some time and that the city can have on the books until such time it's needed to develop it. The advantage of it is if the city is acquiring and banking the property, the city can have much more direct influence or involvement in terms of determining the type of housing or the degree of affordability on the housing, just because they're more of a partner in that sort of scenario.
Yeah, you got a
Oh, sorry, Pat. Yes.
If the city was to acquire some land for this kind of program, would that be through eminent domain?
No, suppose you could. I haven't seen it done. I'm not familiar enough with eminent domain in this sort of circumstance to say definitively whether or not that work. Um, Typically, it would be purchased through typical property acquisition way. The funding source would be through either like an urban renewal district or some other revenue source.
Okay.
So another strategy is a construction excise tax, and this is a fairly new type of funding that can be done. And what this is essentially a tax that can be done up to a certain percent on new construction, and that revenue can um, be used to cover things like developer incentives or housing programs as defined by the jurisdictions. The type of um, it's yeah this if the city implements a CET tax, it would be on commercial or industrial uses, and the funds must be used for developer incentives, or at least half of the funds must be used for developer incentives, and the other half of it can be unrestricted um, for different types of developments. Several jurisdictions are already doing this. The primary advantage of it would be that you have a dedicated source of revenue, but the drawback is that it does increase the cost of housing development. So there's a trade-off to consider there.
Lori Oliver and I were on a affordable housing committee a few years ago with Kat, and this issue came up and we voted it down. We voted it down because we felt that although it would create a pool of money for some people to have housing, it would increase costs for other people to have housing. So it was a net non-benefit. It was just a transfer of wealth, and it would have impact middle-class families substantially. And so Kat, when they got done with our project, did not recommend that to the county.
Yeah, and I think, and just like with, well, everything else that reduces tax, the fire department was definitely against this one. You know, they need that revenue coming in to be able to protect and support the development of new houses and the development of commercial, industrial, everything. So that was kind of a not a popular topic when we looked at this one here at the city, and I guess it was about 2018, 2019.
So the next strategy is public-private partnerships and community land trusts. Um, Public-private partnership is a partnership between the city and a developer to achieve a desired outcome. In this case, the need would be for more housing or affordable housing, and with a public-private partnership, the city would either come to the table in the partnership either through, in the example of land acquisition, they would say they would have the property and they need the expertise from the developer to develop it, or the city could potentially identify a revenue source and use that revenue source to partner with developers and help offset the cost of the housing that a developer would incur to, for example, build affordable housing. The strategy in this particular case does give the city, again, more input, more influence in terms of the outcomes, in terms of influencing the degree of affordability or the types of housing that get built, or of housing that get built. Community land trusts is a similar sort of public-private partnership where a nonprofit owns land and uses it for low-income households to either rent or have a low-income way for home ownership opportunity. And again, this would work with an example where if the city already has the land, they can do a public-private partnership in this example to create that community land trust whereby the nonprofit would manage and run that.
Oh, quick correction. That was a mistake for me, not CJ. I was confusing some different options here. Construction excise tax is not a tax exemption or abatement that would affect the fire department. I was confusing that with something else. This is a tax. It doesn't abate taxes or anything. It's just adding an additional charge to a permit if somebody's wanting to build something new. So scratch that from the record.
Right. Last two strategies. Strategy 17 is financial.
1 second, CJ. Jennifer?
I just want to make a comment about community land trust. There's quite a bit of state money available through Oregon Housing and Community Services for those types of developments.
Oh, thank you.
Right. So the financial, thank you. Financial assistance and home buyer education. These are a range of tools for maintaining affordability for existing residences. And this can come in a number of forms, from something like rental assistance or loans for homeowners for improvements, loans to landlords for repairs or upgrades to their housing, or it could also be home buyer education programs. The city could either develop these sort of programs in-house or partner with or support other organizations that do those. There's a couple examples of organizations in the area that do provide some of those services, including the Open Door Housing Works or Community Action Team. I think that was mentioned earlier. Those organizations are supporting existing residences and helping people with the home ownership process. And finally, the city could establish tenant protection programs. Touched on this a little bit earlier. The tenant protection programs are really intended to help people stay in place and help prevent or reduce the risk of being displaced or having their rents reach a point where they're unaffordable. So some examples of this include notification for no cause eviction, where landlords are required to give a 30-day or a 60-day notice for an eviction, and then makes it a little more makes it a little easier for people to stay there or to be able to prepare in the case that were to happen. You could also do a renter relocation assistance, and this is a type of program where a landlord would have to pay a certain amount to assist tenants with moving or moving out in the case of a no eviction sort of situation. The city could also do a rental registration program, which would allow the city to develop an inventory of all the rentals in the area, and that could help with notifications of changes in kind of landlord policies or rules and requirements to make sure that the rental, like renters, are getting all the information that's needed. And then you can also do a rental inspection program where you can monitor or help protect tenants through rental inspections, kind of like inspection of sorts. So a lot of these strategies that we went through, they require administrative time and resources. Again, these may not be appropriate for the city at this time, but everything that we covered here could be considered at some point down the road for addressing housing needs should circumstances change. That
I'm curious, were there any in particular that, oh, go ahead. Were you gonna have
I'm just
Len
gonna
fill
ask
in?
NJ to go first, and then you can ask that question.
Len?
I would look at the renter relocation assistance as totally opposed to the capital market, okay? The investor builds the property, manages the property, and operates the property. And when you become this way, you've taken out the free market of the process. That's all.
Okay, so I was just curious if there were any of these that this committee would think would maybe need to change their priority level, or any that you just want to have us draw attention to as this moves to the adoption process to final products.
Sounded like we wanted to promote housing for seniors, maybe not senior housing, but housing for seniors.
So
So
incentivize.
incentives
Mhm.
to
Yep, I heard
help
that.
provide housing for seniors.
If we can through density, so it doesn't affect the city's coffers. That way it's a win-win. The city gets their revenue, the developer isn't mandated to do this. He has an option, which might promote some of that.
And that's one way. And there's other incentives too. We had the Jennifer brought up the deferring SDC fees until, in which deferral would be a loan to, like the city of Portland does, until C of O or until
Right. I have
a
that.
year or
Yeah.
two
So I have
after.
that. And I'm thinking too that that could also not just be for the capital A affordable, but also for senior housing.
Exactly. Or housing for seniors.
Housing for seniors.
Housing for seniors, I would say.
Okay.
Then
I don't know if there'll be a point we could do number 11, but the expedited,
I had that down too. Actually.
okay. I know there's a staffing issue, so.
There is.
And so if that could be done, I think it would be positive. It would be, but it's a question of staffing.
Correct.
Number 11 is a win-win. Joe?
Thank you. Kind of looking as you move forward on these recommendations, are you also open to look back at the 2018 zoning changes to look at any changes and pull back from those possibly?
So of the previous H&A implementation measures, the ones that we're looking at refining further include the lot size requirement for additional increments on triplexes, quadplexes, and townhouses. Some recommendations for cottage cluster housing development standards. Pulled up here.
Is there something in particular?
I was just meaning more for the planning commit or the 50-year plan of them looking at this housing needs authority recommendations, but then also looking back at the 2018 changes to see if there's anything on there you like to open up and pull back or revisit. Are we only looking at the recommendations?
I think there's an opportunity if the committee is interested in anything that was highlighted in the cover memo. We have a discussion and see what makes sense for that.
See, Jennifer, did you have a comment? You had,
Number 17 there, it doesn't look like it would cost anything if the city was promoting other.
Indeed. Is there, could we even have sort of a link on our website to some of the programs that would be available through? Okay, perfect. We can coordinate on that.
That might be somebody to talk to about that.
Yes, Kim.
Zoning. Okay, so these are the recommendations essentially for rezoning about different types of housing. Lori, when we get, is there other sections of this process that we get to that we look at?
Code language.
Well, would that be what switches things from like residential to commercial or?
So that would be rezoning of land. And yes, we will look at that. And it's going to be part of more of the 50-year look at land needs as opposed to the statutory requirement for the EOA and the HNA to be just a 20-year look. So Echo Northwest will come back, and I think it's in January that we start having the conversations about other land needs. And so when you look at the acreages we need of other land needs in addition to what we need for housing and employment, then once we get the full picture, we'll see like, does it make sense to rezone existing lands? Does it not? Does it make sense to do a UGB expansion at this time? And so, yeah, we will look at that specifically. Like, this is what we have now. Do we want to rezone what we have, and how does it all fit together? So, yeah, we will definitely look at that.
Oh,
Yeah, so if we think some of these things are important, like the senior housing and incentivizing for density, in 2018, we're already opened up, quite a bit on the density end, up to 60 feet, et cetera. Should we look at pulling some of those back, for instance, and then allowing that to happen through incentives so that we can get some of this stuff done versus just getting more density, for instance? Would we relook at that as a combination? That's the question.
Lori, you have any
It would
comments on
likely
that?
be difficult to downzone since we've
That's
already.
exactly what I think too.
Yeah.
I think that ship's already
Yeah.
left the dock.
That was a discussion over a year or more in this room with a previous committee and planning commission and city council who adopted it. So it's very difficult to reduce after that. Which is why we want to be really careful not to necessarily, do any more reductions on lot size because
So correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand it correctly, just for people maybe that don't understand this, is once the city increases density, there's actual maybe some legal issues for reducing it density afterwards. You can always increase, but you can't take
Correct.
away.
Right.
So then you open yourself to lawsuits.
Right.
That's why I said earlier that we should need to be careful. We can always increase density in the future for stuff, but we don't want to jump at it, because if we jump at it and it turns out that it's a mistake, we can't really take it back. So anyhow, that.
Were there any other of these strategies that they should look at? We had number 8, number 11,
17.
number 17 were the 3 that we were really focused on. Okay. Anyone online, NJ, has any other comments?
Not showing hands.
Okay. All right. So the next steps. Who wants to discuss the next steps, Lori or CJ?
So there are a couple advisory committee meetings up and coming. The next one is scheduled November 1st, and that's going to be with Echo Northwest and 3J. At this point, our role or our involvement with the advisory committee meetings as MIG and Johnson Economics. This is our last meeting tonight, but certainly We've got good amount of feedback that we'll be working with city staff to update the housing strategies report and get that in a place where it can be finalized. Um, eh, Basically, for the housing needs analysis, we're going to be handing off all this material to city staff uh, for them to essentially sit on until its 50-year plan reaches its conclusion, at which point housing needs analysis will be adopted, be refined to extend out to that 50-year time frame. So, in some respects, this is a little bit of a goodbye, and I do appreciate the time and the conversations. But we am happy to take any additional comments that you could share with Lori that will get passed on to me. We can incorporate that into the materials as we work to wrap this up.
Okay, thank you. The next meeting, Lori, you want to go over the next meeting?
Yeah, so let's see, the next committee meeting here is November 1st. That's going to cover the draft economic opportunities analysis. We're going to try and get that out to you like 2 weeks early instead of 1 week early, so you guys have some time with that. And then January 10th, the following advisory committee meeting will be talking about other land needs. Again, those like parklands, and some other public land needs. So we'll discuss that. And then we also do have a check-in with City Council and Planning Commission Monday, December 5th. And that is a check-in to just bring them up to date on the draft economic opportunities analysis. So those are our next 2 meetings in our upcoming event. And I just thank you all for being here and for participating in this process. We greatly appreciate it.
Just a reminder, we have until the end of the week for the survey.
The 30th, actually.
The 30th.
Yeah,
Okay.
Friday at 5 o'clock it closes.
Friday at 5. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your time. And thank you, CJ, for all your hard work on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senior housing is